What's up, Stitt-Heads? Crack that beer. We're gonna have a good time today. So I'm wearing a "I will not comply" T-shirt today, and it kind of fits with the format of today's episode. We're gonna get into Waco, David Koresh, the Branch Davidians, what went down, Janet Reno, Lon Horaci. We'll kind of jump around all over we can't forget Mr. Mustache, Geraldo Rivera too. But I'll let today's guest start wherever he wants to with it. Paranoid American, welcome back, dude. How you doing?
Appreciate it, man. Happy Waco month.
Happy Waco month. Wasn't Waco February?
Well, there's a direct link between Ruby Ridge, Waco, and Oklahoma City bombing.
Hmm.
So I celebrate all of them in April for a number of reasons. One of them is Patriot Day, which is like the common theme among all of them.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah,
So
dude.
here,
What
I
year was Waco? 92, I believe, right?
well, I think we should actually start in Ruby Ridge first because I
Yeah.
think you don't get a Waco without a Ruby Ridge to come before it because that was the original ATF Bumble Keystone Cop operation where they felt like, okay, we really got to go into this next one and make a really strong impact to justify us existing as an organization. So the Ruby Ridge one. How familiar are you with Ruby Ridge? I assume your shirt
I'm
says that
I'm
you're
very
familiar.
familiar with it. I've actually tried to reach out to the daughter. Is it Sarah, I believe, one of the survivors? But anyways, yeah, she goes on podcasts and stuff. I'm very familiar with the Ruby Ridge, but what do you want to get into on it?
Okay, well, just I guess a quick recap, just so we've got context for exactly what happens in Waco. So Ruby Ridge is important. It starts with Randy Weaver. He was a former Green Beret, ex-military. It's going to be a constant theme as well. And he goes off to Idaho to kind of just live remotely, get a little bit off the grid. I think there were some versions where he was trying to pull his kids out of school and he was going to homeschool and he just wanted to get completely off the grid. So he's already on the radar for being a little bit outside the beaten path, right? It didn't just like happen out of nowhere. And he's looking around into some organizations that have got all sorts of plants in them, and he decides none of them are really for him. And he ends up getting talked into filing down like a shotgun, right? And when
Mhm.
he files this thing down, and it's literally like a eighth of an inch or like a 16th of an inch under whatever it needs to be. And this is after an undercover I mean, coerce might be a strong word, but an undercover like pressures him to do the original cut. And then he's like, a little bit more, please, right? A little bit more off the top. He takes that little bit more off the top. And then that turns into a warrant in 91. And apparently there was a confusion about when the court date was going to be. So whether you believe that or not, end result is that Randy Weaver blows the court date, whether by accident or by design or whatever, and this results in August 21, the U.S. Marshals basically show up and they have a confrontation between Sammy Weaver. And this is kind of like where all of this kicks off. And then the very next day, the FBI deploys their hostage team. And this is where Lon Haruchi shoots Randy Weaver, shoots Kevin Harris, and kills Vicky Weaver in the front of the door, like right into the cabin. And
Don't
then I
forget the
think
dog.
for the next, yeah, don't forget the dog. I mean, the dog's a given, right?
Right.
The dog always has to die first. That's the initiation ritual before they proceed with the rest of it. So, and the one that really gets me is that after he shoots Vicky, they start taunting him, and Vicky's just laying there dead. And the whole time they're like, "Where's Vicky, Randy? Where's Vicky? Is Vicky okay?" Like knowing full well exactly what happened to all this. So this is a 11-day standoff this goes through until the very last day of August in 92, and then he basically gets acquitted in 1993, and he gets a $3.1 million settlement long after this. So he's sort of the, I struggle to use the word success story, you know what I mean? Because he lost everything in this
Hmm.
event. It was truly horrible. But this was the very first instance of the government pressuring you and then using gun law, ATF laws essentially, to then entrap you and then use that as a reason to move in with ultimate force, no questions
Hmm.
asked, right? Like
Kind of like that
shoot first, question
Michigan
later.
governor situation. Remember that a couple years ago, where like 14 out of the 16 people involved that were trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer or whatever, they all ended up being feds, you know. So it was one of those like the one or two guys sitting in there that's not, they're just preying on you. But
They all
continue,
got
man.
brand new boots, like
Mm-hmm.
fresh out the box, the exact same brand and everything. Still got the tag that says paid by Sam. Okay, so Ruby Ridge just kind of sets a trend, and I think it comes together mostly with Oklahoma City and Timothy McVeigh, but like the three of the different events are incredibly linked in like that later context. So yeah, the Waco happens in February, February 28th in 93, and the version of this one is very similar. It's that um, David Koresh found, I'm going to simplify it, but David Koresh, one of the ways that they decided to start making money was to buy and resell firearms. Like they just became kind of like a gun dealer. And this grabs all sorts of the wrong attention from the wrong places. And one of the shipments that he makes, I believe, are hollowed out grenades or like they're inert grenades, and that technically on paper you're allowed to have those. But again, you're going to get flagged probably for trying to buy these. And what happens is that they decide to just do like a surprise inspection and fail that inspection, determine, okay, now we have just cause to go and do like a raid on this compound. They kind of bumble it. And this one, there's so many series of weird events with Waco in particular. The first one is that they roll up to serve a warrant with like 95 ATF agents. Like this wasn't just a normal warrant serve, right? They intended to be there and have to show force and maybe sit around for as long as they needed to. But when they're on their way there, the mailman is leaving and they stop the mailman to like ask directions, not realizing that the freaking mailman is a Branch Davidian and he's David Koresh's brother-in-law. So he immediately goes and gives them the tip and lets them know, like, hey, the ATF is down here and they're about to do a raid on you guys. So I, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that that was just ATF bumbling, or do you think that there was something intentional with that?
Man, you know, it's a good question because, you know, you almost feel like this weird, even in the mind of Koresh himself, like, oh shit, they're coming for us. Like, so it's time to lock and load, you know. Think of like a good example is the beginning of Devil's Rejects, where the family's having the shootout with all the sheriffs and everybody outside their house, you know. It's like there's this protect yourself kind of thing. But I don't know. Are you asking me like if the dude talking to the mailman, if that was almost like a setup thing, or
Yeah, I mean, because here's the two
I
options,
could
right?
see that
If you
because
boil it
then it
down to the
turns
two
into a
options,
firefight. Yeah.
they're either so inept and so bumbling that they didn't even do the modicum of research to figure out, hey, like it didn't seem like it would be that hard to figure out that the mail delivery guy for the compound on Mount Carmel, which is where the Branch Davidian stayed, happened to be a Branch Davidian himself and the literal, brother-in-law of Koresh. It seems like just the initial surface level sort of investigation would have at least given you that. So when you're rolling up with 95 agents, you're like, oh, there's his brother-in-law. That's the guy,
Hmm.
right? But apparently, either no one did any of that search, and I guess I do believe that. I do believe that maybe they're just Keystone copping it all the way, but it's also really easy to hide behind being inept, right? Out of like, oh, we were just ignorant to it. We were underprepared. It's a little bit easier to hide behind that as the shield versus we planned it all along and that this went exactly as we wanted it to. Because I don't think that's the truth either.
Gotcha. Can you hear me? I feel like my screen is kind of freezing up a little bit.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, so we're gonna have all sorts of glitches, right?
There we go. Well, I just
So
killed my
I can
screen,
hear
but
you.
I'm good. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, dude. It's like it's weird that you think that, yeah, the government, we give them all this credit for. Well, I mean, it's weird. We don't give them credit in some ways, but we also give them credit that you know, oh, well, we find out all these FBI watch lists. They were on our radar. They were whatever. But anywho, I don't know, man. I think there is something more, I don't know, behind it to where I feel like they possibly, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I got distracted by the computer messing up. But either way, yeah, I don't know. I think they just bumbled it. I think it wasn't an intentional thing.
Well, there's a fun little law. I think it's called Gray's Law. I might be wrong on that, but it's a version of Arthur C. Clarke's law that goes something like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? I don't know if you've
Mm.
heard that before,
Hmm.
but this is like a
Hmm.
very common from, well, so there's a version of that that I think is called Gray's Law, and it goes something like any sufficiently advanced form of ineptitude is indistinguishable from malice, meaning that whether you designed to be an asshole or whether you accidentally did something that made you an asshole, the end result is that you're still an asshole at the end of all of it, right? So
Hmm.
it almost doesn't matter whether it was planned or not because all you have are the events that happened and the end result of what happened. And the intent almost goes out the window. I know in the court of law, intent makes such a big difference, but I'm not sure if it matters on something in the case of Waco, right? Intent, whether it was an accident or whether it was not an accident. And this gets crazy because not a lot of people get punished over Waco, aside from just the victims that burn up at Mount Carmel alone, right? Everyone
Hmm.
else kind of gets off the hook, and it was like they had it coming. So the raid starts on in '93 on the 28th, and there's initial shootout where four ATF agents um, and six Branch Davidians were killed. And these numbers are going to be highly suspect right off the bat, okay? Because the gunfight that interestingly enough, there was a video that came out, I want to say in like 2018. The ATF released it and it was called Remembering Waco. And it has like two or three of the different field agents that were there that day doing interviews talking about exactly what happened. And you see one of the lead ATF agents was saying like we were just there to serve a warrant. We had no idea anything was going to escalate. Like the way that they describe it was they just pulled up in their cruiser and they went and knocked on the front door and all of a sudden guns were going off. And again, it was like over 95 ATF agents that roll up in armed gear. Although he also makes a note that a lot of the agents didn't even bring helmets that day. They just kind of like had maybe like a soft vest on and a sidearm, even though there were absolutely other ATF agents there that did have helmets and did have everything else, and they had like the Bradleys that come in soon after all this. So you get conflicting reports on the ATF themselves saying that they were underprepared, that they had no idea what they were walking into. But then what they actually did by rolling up with 95 people seems to say the exact opposite. It seems to say that they knew something that was going to pop off and that it wasn't just a casual, let's go serve this warrant.
Yeah, they showed up with force, and then it's one of those like playing the victim. Not saying it's okay to start shooting, but at the same time, you got almost 100 agents at your front door and military vehicles. It's kind of like, okay, I guess this is about to pop off. So it's just a matter of who fires first.
So within hours of this happening, after this initial gunfight, the ATF does realize that they were underprepared. I mean, it's so hard because there's like at least three different stories. There's the story that came out at the time that the ATF was saying that they were underprepared and that this is why everything went sideways. And then you have this Remembering Waco that came out in 2018, where the ATF themselves were saying, "Oh no, we had been practicing this. That they had set up a full compound that was meant to mimic Mount Carmel, that was meant to mimic where people were going to be at, and that they had been
Interesting.
doing this for weeks, if not months. That this was like a highly trained." Coordinated effort, but then you have like what actually happened the day, and it doesn't look like anything is really coordinated unless the third option is that it kind of went down the way that they were expecting it to go down, and that they meant to do a show of force. They meant to be antagonists in that forcing Waco and Koresh and all the Branch Davidians to sort of act like cornered victims. And now they can just kind of, pull out all the stops and say, hey, they were coming at us. And they also, there's conflicting reports about how much the media want to be involved. Because in retrospect, the ATF and Remembering Waco was like, we wanted the media there. We wanted the world to see exactly how these Branch Davidians were, treating people and everything. But then you also have Koresh that's like begging for media to come and give actual coverage. Like, let me do an interview. Let me get my message out in the media. So I don't know what to believe in terms of where the media was at. Although if you got to pull my leg, a Bradley tank to head, tear gas napalm to head, I would say that the media was in bed with the government. They probably had well-known advance. At least some people must have had advance notice that they were truly planning this for weeks or if not months before time.
Well, that's a good point too, because what if the media was already kind of paying attention to the Davidians because of, I believe, like what you were talking about, what kind of started setting some of these things off before anybody showed up was when they ordered the dummy, not dummy grenades, but non-primered grenades and shit. And then they also ordered black powder as well, which kind of looks like intent to maybe make grenades. And so, anyways, if the local area had been noticing these kind of things and it was already on their radar for media news wise, of course, once you start seeing all these military vehicles rolling into town, you're going to have media guys chasing after it. But, and then that's also Geraldo Rivera. I mean, I've heard reports that he's basically the one that kind of instituted where the gunshots because he was in a helicopter, I believe, right? And he was flying over the compound. Do you know that part?
This became not only was Geraldo Rivera making clout off of this, but there was also a really interesting Australian current affair news group that was there at the time or like leading up to it, just doing a normal story on why are these Australian families going off to Texas? Why are they flying to the United States and going to this religious compound in Texas? So Current Affair had interviews with a majority of the victims, even a few different survivors, and I think even Koresh himself, very shortly before this entire thing popped off. So you have a lot of interesting media coverage and people that like Geraldo Rivera has seems to have made a name for himself in being completely inserted into some of like the biggest cultural events of the 80s and 90s, right? He was at the center
Mm-hmm.
of Waco. He was kind of at the center of a lot of the satanic panic claims of the 80s and 90s. And I mean, I would argue that all of these have military connotations to them. So I think that maybe Geraldo Rivera, he's either one of like the useful idiot agents where you can plant a story and this guy will take it up and he'll make sure to cover it versus actually being in the know, right? So I think that he might have just been like an unwitting agent in some cases.
Yeah, he's an ambulance chaser, opportunist guy, and it's just back when reporting was reporting, you're like, yeah, but dude, man, he's definitely getting inside tips from the feds on half of those stories that he reported on over the
I
years.
don't know
So
if
he's
that was ever true either, man. Like even the Pulitzer Prize, right? The Joseph Pulitzer was also known for yellow journalism. He's the one that printed on with yellow, and that he was known for just putting garbage out and kind of having that sensationalist headlines that weren't really true. Yet that's what we call an award for giving someone that excels at doing journalism, right? So it's kind of an inside joke. It's like knowing that Joseph Pulitzer and him representing the beacon of the height of journalism really is nothing to begin with.
yeah, no kidding. So like was he there from the beginning, Rivera? Because I know obviously you're gonna have like local news and media there first rolling up, like what the hell are all these FBI agents rolling or ATF agents? But was Rivera like already on the scene as the stuff hit the fan, like the first day of shooting?
So Rivera, I think I don't know what station that he was working for at this time, but he basically starts showing up on the scene to get some of that extra coverage. I believe sometime after the initial raid, because again, that very first raid was the ATF, and then within hours they have to call the FBI because they don't know exactly what they're doing, right? Um, the warrant. Let me just rewind a little bit because the initial warrant was served in like 3 days prior to that. It was served on like February 25th. It was in 93 still. And they basically present him with this for firearm violations. Like you said, that he had like a mixture of non-primer grenades, but then he also maybe had intent. And in retrospect, there's some really good arguments for what do you think if you went to like a Dick's Sporting Goods store, right?
Hmm.
They're also selling all of these different components. So the same leverage that was used to serve this firearms warrant against David Koresh could technically have been used with any other arms dealer in the area, where it's like, hey, you've got all these different components that you could combine and turn into this thing. But because it wasn't a superstore and because he, because they wanted something else on him, then they can use this different sort of justification. So
Yeah,
after
I've
this,
gone to guns. No, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead. What about the
I
gun
was just gonna
store?
say I've gone to gun shows ever since I was a kid, and I even remember back in the '90s you could buy, you know, whatever you call them, like decommissioned or whatever grenades, and people would buy them for paperweights. Like they'd put them on their desks, like just a little cool display thing or whatever. So, but anyways, with him, with the gun thing was one of the charges, but also you get into the idea where they were saying that these children are being sexually abused and this and that. But a little tidbit that people forget is that the compound had already been investigated by Child Protective Services, and they didn't find a damn thing. So it just became another piece of to add to the story for the media and everybody to say like they got guns and he's stealing everybody's wives, which he actually did. Every time you get into a cult, they're taking your wives.
I'm
But
on the fence on this, man, because I think that it's possible for you to both distrust what happened with the ATF and the FBI and then the state covering it up, and then also be critical of maybe what was happening at Mount Carmel within the
100%.
Branch Davidians, right?
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, like I don't think we're ever going to get any solid answers on this. You have the state propaganda side, which definitely leans all the way into, and I don't mean to laugh, but it's like, hey, don't worry, we were justified in burning all those people up in napalm by accident because they were being abused. So it's
Hmm.
okay that we took these extreme measures that led to everyone being incinerated because maybe they were being abused. We don't know, but like things tell us that he was abusing kids and that he was stealing people's wives. Therefore, everyone dying in an inferno is somehow justified. That's kind of the long story short of that, right? And
Not
it's
to
sort of
sidetrack, but that's kind of like Iran right now. Like, we got to go help save and liberate all those people. Meanwhile, we're going to cut off their water and their electricity and bomb the shit out of them, but we're saving them. And you're like, well, what the fuck? Which one is it? Like, seems like you might be harming people a little more than saving them. So, yeah, the idea of like, oh, these kids, even if they were sexually assaulted, they could have survived. But no, we decided to ram the building and shit, and we catch the whole building on fire. Like, it's kind of retarded.
I think the other aspect, the only part that makes logical sense to me, where I try to like rationalize if this wasn't 100% scripted, and I don't think that deeply into conspiracy theories where like someone scripted every single step and every mistake wasn't really a mistake, that was part of the formula.
All
But I
right,
think
Candace
it's
Owens. No.
it's more of like a really, forgive me for a bad analogy here, but it's like you got a really bad authoritarian parent that knows that they like push too far. Maybe they spanked their kid a little too hard or shook the baby a little too hard. Um, and now in order to not back down and admit that they went over the line, it's like now they have to keep justifying why they crossed that line. And in fact, maybe I got to cross it even more because I'm so right on my justification on me escalating the situation. Then I guess I got to escalate it some more to keep proving that I was right to originally escalate it. And I think it gets caught into you see this in like police abuse issues too, right? Maybe
Oh
not
yeah.
on live PD or on like cops or anything, the stuff that only makes the news when a police station gets sued, but you can see a cop like starts to push the authority a little too far, and then all of a sudden they start making up rules and like, well, I'm gonna arrest you for, whatever, like so like using that abuse of force. But when you've got 95 ATF agents that are all abusing and using excessive force and kind of like bending the laws to whatever their aim is, now all of a sudden you can't really just be like it was that guy, that ATF agent, it's all his fault. So you also can't have the entire ATF take a fall on this. So at a certain point, I think even the FBI came in and the FBI was like, you guys messed this all up, but we can't, like, you're not going to get the blame for this because the ATF would cease to exist if you really took this hit. So now
Mhm.
you've got the ATF and the FBI and the state in general all with a vested interest to justifying what happened after the fact. And I think that's probably the most important dynamic to understand about Waco as a whole, is that it wasn't necessarily Branch Davidians were doing nothing wrong and the state just came in and murdered them. It was that the state came in, had to justify the existence of the ATF, and then when it screwed up, had to cover it up, and then had to like over the top justify all this from happening to begin with.
Yeah, they had to double down. And then especially after Ruby Ridge, like you brought up in the beginning, I mean, they needed a win at this point, unfortunately, as simple as putting it. You know, the ATF needed to look good in some regard. And they're like, look, we took out this compound of these evil religious zealots and everybody's all good now, right? We'll shovel the story under the rug.
So here's something that I did recently. I was telling you this before we started recording, but I got a series called Under the Docks, and the main reason that the series exists was to give me an excuse and my co-host Sean Chris from Kill the Mockingbirds podcast to just go back and rewatch old conspiracy documentaries that kind of like I cut my teeth on when I was a teenager, early 20s, right? Like mid
Mhm.
90s to early 2000s. And in prep for April, we basically did a whole bunch of different Waco documentaries. So the main one, and I'm curious if you've seen any of these. So the main one that came out like right on the heels of Waco, came out in '93, was called The Big Lie by this lady called Linda Thompson. And Linda
Hmm.
Thompson was like a super based um, sort of conservative, ultra like Second Amendment advocate, and decides to take on just the investigative aspect of what actually happened in Waco. And it came out in '93, and then she immediately had a follow up because when it came out, there was lots of criticism, lots of people questioning,
Hmm.
like, was this footage edited? Where is this information came from? So then she also came out with Waco 2, The Big Lie Continues in '94. So between the two, the first one's like a half hour, second one's like almost an hour and a half. So between the two of them, you've got like a 2 hour Waco supercut documentary that came out literally less than a year after Waco actually happened.
That's
So
crazy.
there's a lot of very specific claims that gets made in this documentary. So the first one was going over the state's claim against David Koresh. And like you mentioned, it was accusations of abuse and adultery and stealing people's wives and illegal arms. It was just like, let's stack up as many things that we can to justify any sort of show of force. And there was an internal investigation on February 28th that basically they were questioning this might have been based on bad information, that some of this was kind of planted. And the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, well, no kidding. That's the whole point that these reports were made. The other really interesting note that comes up in the Big Lie is that Waco, Texas, had a abnormally higher than anywhere else in the entire country number of gun prosecutions. So
Mm.
if you found yourself on the other end of the ATF's enforcement end, then Waco, there was like a 10 times chance that you were in Waco dealing with this issue than anywhere else in the entire country. Even though Waco is not like a highly populated area. It
Yeah, it's small.
so part of this, if I put my tinfoil hat on, it's almost like it might not have even necessarily had to do with David Koresh or even the Branch Davidians. It might have just been the perfect storm that in Waco something was going to happen because this is where gun prosecutions were at an all-time high anyways, and then David Koresh just presented the perfect opportunity for them to kind of like dial it up a little bit. But even
Hmm.
without Koresh and Mount Carmel, something might have popped off in Waco eventually just because of this horrible lottery that you're playing with, Second Amendment rights.
That's a
Um,
crazy point, and it's Texas, and it's like you would think it's not Vermont or some shit like that, but yeah.
yeah, we're not talking like San Francisco, right? This is Waco, Texas, that has the highest number of gun prosecutions by the ATF out of anywhere else in the country. Weird anomaly. They don't really say in like, and here's why that is, or here's how that happened. It's just a strange anomaly. So here's the other one is that when I mentioned the ATF within the first few hours, they end up having 4 casualties in the ATF agents and then 6 Branch Davidians. Well, the initial footage that gets shown all over the news outlets and it's featured in this video, and she plays it in slow mo over and over again, and it shows these agents shooting at the house as 4 other ATF agents are climbing up ladders on the roof,
Hmm. Is
and
that the infamous photo?
they're
Dude gets
showing
yeeted on the rooftop.
well, they're showing the rest of the ATF agents behind where this is happening, and there's absolutely no bullets hitting the ground or cars or anything. So any claims that the Branch Davidians were shooting back during that initial raid, there's not a lot of evidence that actually shows any of that's true. We'll get to like the front door ends up playing into this, and that's like one of the biggest smoking guns that we'll get into. Um, Also, the audio on the videotapes that Linda Thompson claims is that the gunfire sounds are 100% coming from the ATF agents, and none of them are coming from inside the compound shooting outwards. Then she
Mhm.
goes and she shows as bullet holes start showing up in like the sides of walls that you can see that the trajectory is that the bullets are going in the house and then they only come out of the house once agents go inside. And then it shows that this is the most famous clip, I think, especially in the conspiracy footage of Waco, where the three agents climb up the ladder, they go inside of a room, and then the fourth agent throws a grenade into the room after three ATF agents just entered it, and then shoots into the room. And obviously, you can't see like what he's seeing and what he's shooting at,
Right.
but that's wild. I don't know what all the different training tactics that they led up to this, where you wait for three of your coworkers to go inside of a room and then you throw a grenade in after them. That's wild. So again, I don't know whether this is like the planned version or this is just like Keystone Cops. And I would just pull up that Gray's Law, right? Any sufficiently advanced incompetence is indistinguishable from malice. So that's what I go
Mhm.
with.
Yeah, dude. And then, man, it's like you don't want to justify any of it, but then you get the idea that like these guys, the Davidians, they were a what was it? What's the sect that they basically came off of? The religious sect. What the hell is it? Seventh Day Adventists or whatever, right? Or however you say that. And so then that's kind of like a doomsday cult, anyways, too. And then, you just kind of make your own laws eventually. So that's why now they're the Branch Davidians. And it's funny because the Davidians, you think his name is David Koresh. First of all, that's not even his real name. And
No,
second of
it
all,
was Vernon Howell. Yeah.
Vernon Howell. I'd change my damn name too if that was my name. But, he's got a weird name. He changes it. But then it happens to just like link up with, Davidians, which is kind of what they were calling themselves. Anywho, so there's just a weird little wordplay in there that people don't realize. But then you think about they're from a doomsday cult situation, anyways. So this prophecy fulfilling before their eyes at the same time. They're like, see, look, David was right. They're coming for us. We're all gonna die, and it's just a crazy thing that I wish more people really dug into Waco. It doesn't mean Koresh and his people were good people. It just means that, man, the government fucked up so bad.
Well, I got some other really fun ones for you, man. So this is a claim made in the Big Lie. And I did as much research that I feel like I was able to do into this topic. And I'll give you my findings. But the three people that went into that window in that footage, the ATF agents, those are apparently three of the four that died that day. And those three guys coincidentally all happened to be bodyguards for Bill Clinton while he was doing
Oh.
his campaign run previously. So I don't know if you're like a bet man or if you're into odds and statistics, but what are the chances that the three people that died in Waco in that very first sort of, onslaught also just coincidentally all happened to be private bodyguards for Bill Clinton? So the implication that's being made in the Big Lie from the 93 documentary is that those guys were sent in and that grenade followed them in that room because maybe they had information that could lead to the arrest of Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. I
My
mean,
exact
that's a
thought, dude.
very
Yeah.
large stretch, but again, what are the chances that these three people, and just to put like to beat anyone to the asterisk where it's like that doesn't sound quite right. Well, this was because they basically moonlit, and when Bill Clinton came to that area that they were working and they were based out of, that they would be the ones that would end up serving on a security detail. It's not like they were his personal bodyguards that went with him all over the place.
Hmm.
It's just
Hmm.
that previously all three of those agents that died had worked as private security for Bill Clinton in some capacity. But again, it's an interesting it's just coincidence that I
Yeah,
haven't heard
coincidences
come up
exist.
outside of
Yeah.
this.
That's interesting because, and then you got Janet Reno, who was, excuse me, she was head of the ATF, I believe, right? Was that her position, Janet Reno?
No, she was state. She was in State Department.
Secretary of
She
State
wasn't,
or
yeah,
something
she
like that.
wasn't the
Yeah.
ATF.
But she
She
was
carried
also,
water for the ATF because that was
yeah,
like under her purview.
right. And then that's funny. A lot of people forget, it's like the 90s. Oh, we missed the 90s. We missed the 90s. There was a lot of crazy shit that happened under the Bill Clinton era that we just kind of moved on because, our brains are so short, what am I trying to say? We can't pay attention to shit anymore. So we don't even look at anything from 30 years ago, let alone 30 days ago anymore. But yeah, dude, that's an interesting thought about the bodyguards being taken out. Because as soon as you said those three that went in were previous bodyguards, my thought was like, that's why the grenade was thrown in there.
Right,
Damn straight.
right. And the fascinating part to me is that this is 1993 that this theory is coming out about the Clinton body count. So this is
And
this
how
is
many
not
more
like
now? Yeah.
this is early. This is like way pre before anyone's talking about Clinton body count. So it's
Hmm.
not that it happens to just be in this Waco documentary. Another
Crazy.
interesting note that comes up in The Big Lie is something that doesn't get brought up very often, if at all. I think this is like new information whenever I hear this claim again, but that the use of tanks by the ATF was not a direct result of the firefight. It was because they claimed there was also a meth lab at Mount Carmel, and that the fact
Mm.
that they said there was a meth lab, that's what allowed them to bring in the tanks, or at least it was used as an additional justification in order to move the tanks in. So
Didn't they plow the tank into the damn building though? So if there is a meth lab, then like you've got a shitload of explosives in there.
yeah, I mean, the what actually happens with the tank, again, who knows if that was planned or not. It definitely seems like um, it was an extreme use of force.
There's a
It
Leroy
was an
Jenkins.
obvious fuck up, but no one really ever got in any trouble for it. There was, if anything, people look back and it's like, we're so sorry that you had to go through that, tank operator. Like, oh, that must be, heavy shoulders, for you to be dealing with all this trauma. We're so sorry. I'm sure that he's living off of like security and everything at this point.
Here's an interesting thought. So Koresh, he was born in 59, and my dad, he was born in 61, so was my mom. So I mean, hypothetically, if this would have, whether he turned himself in or whether this escalated or didn't escalate, like he could still be alive today. Like it's just an interesting little thing I thought of the other day when I was just kind of prepping for this. Like, man, what if David Koresh would have surrendered and was still alive? Because didn't he record a bunch of like audio as well while he was in there? Wasn't he making phone calls and stuff talking about being shot and things like that?
Yeah, that was part of the negotiation was that he was supposed to be able to read his seven seals and his manifesto and everything.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and not only did that happen, but also he ended up getting video camcorder, and they were just like recording themselves, like here I am with my one of my many wives, my kids, and then also just other people that were on the compound, just interviews with them, and I don't think it was in The Big Lie, in one of these other Waco documentaries there's a really creepy video because it's a kid being interviewed, and obviously it's like a Branch Davidian interviewing the kid on this camera, so it's
Say the
they're
right
kind of like
thing.
leaning into it, and the
Hmm.
kid is saying like, "Please don't kill us, please, U.S. government, don't murder us." And it opens up with that quote, and knowing what ends up like that kid does end up dying in this inferno caused by
Oh,
the tank. So okay, Waco Big Lie 2, they get a little bit deeper into some of the claims here, and they also mention some of the corruption in the ATF. So one of the main claims is that the Secretary of Treasury at this point was a guy named Lloyd Benson, and then there were these three, and I'm going to say independent in air quotes, these three independent investigators. Well, all three of those independent investigators was Edwin Guthman, Henry Rutan Jr., and Willie Williams. A great name.
Willie
Um,
Williams.
Willie Williams. It sounds like a cover name. That all three of those people that were involved in the independent investigation of Waco, they were previously involved in a police firebombing of a headquarters of a group called Move in Philadelphia in 1985. So something very
Ooh.
similar where fire goes off and people are incinerated and they're killed. the three people involved in that end up being the independent investigators for Waco, where something very similar happens. So talk about kind of like a stacked deck a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And so this move operation, 1985, the police dropped bombs off in a house, and that resulted in a fire that killed 11 people, which were six adults and five children. So here's an example of these three people that burned children alive that then are in charge of investigating another instance of the state burning children alive. The biggest question too is like, why did the government lie about Waco? The number one reason was because kids died. If kids hadn't died in this event,
Yep.
it would have been so much easier to sweep up under the rug and just to make up any kind of other claims. But the fact that they all died under the hand of the government, now they had to like bring up all these other lies. So I can start going through. I know we're limited on time, but I can go through a punch list of some of the lies that
Yeah,
get
go through
brought up by
some,
the
dude.
ATF.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, and this is from what's known as the Blue Book report, I believe. And it's called the Blue Book report because this was the report the ATF wrote about the Waco incident, which is interesting because it doesn't actually say Waco on the front. It says David Koresh. So really the report was like they were out to get David Koresh from day one, and they don't even hide that in the incident report about Waco because they name it after him. So in this Blue Book, they claim that the Davidians had more guns and firepower than the ATF did. Um,
Hell yeah.
well, hell yeah, except it's not true.
I know,
It was,
but I'm just
it was
saying.
absolutely not true. The
If that was
ATF
my accusation against me, I'm like, fuck yeah, dude. I caught a 14-inch bass, man. No,
I got like 5 or 6 boxes I bought from Walmart last week. Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty well prepared.
hell yeah.
But so that just in context, the ATF had multiple armored vehicles, helicopters, military coordination, FBI on speed dial, plus, depending on claims, they had been training for this and simulated standoffs for like anywhere between 3 or 4 weeks to 2 or 3 months. So they were definitely not underpowered compared to the Branch Davidians, which was mostly David Koresh and like children and women and people that had flown in from like Australia to praise Jesus, right? That this was
And
not
cucked dudes. Yeah, cucked dudes that gave their wives up.
right. This was not Sons of Anarchy. I guess that's the story, right? This is
Yeah.
like a bunch of cucks that maybe a handful of them weren't afraid to touch a gun. So a week, this is okay, this is where it's going to get freaking insane. 1 week after Mount Carmel was burnt to the ground, NBC aired this like made for TV edition of Waco. And in the portrayal of Waco, they actually show the government like knocking on like, David, are you there? Can we come
Oh
in?
my
And it
God.
shows the Branch Davidians there, like freaking armed commandos, like holding machine guns, just like bah, 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 just mowing down ATF agents. And like David looks like a Dolph Lundgren Universal Soldier, like enemy or
Nice.
something. So
Yeah.
this is literally a week after Mount Carmel gets burnt down, not from the initial raid, but after that raid had been over, it was like attracting people and causing all sorts of PR issues. So they decide like let's just burn this freaking thing to the ground so there's not like a monument left over or any sort of
Mm-hmm.
visual for people to recognize. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so in 73 of this Blue Book page report, it mentions that the ATF not only were they um, planning this way ahead of time, but they had directly coordinated with Fort Bragg, the Army Special Forces unit. So we're talking now that ATF and the Army both had some sort of role in how this all played out. Special Forces is mentioned numerous times in this Blue Book. They also mention a guy named William Buford, who was a Special Army combat veteran that was in charge of some of the strategy that goes in this. There's retired Delta Force commandos. One of them is Wade Ishimoto, who's this like a lot of them it seemed like they pull these guys in because this is what they're known to do. The ATF lied about element of surprise. They lied about moving the rate up a day. They also had doctored footage. This is the claim from this documentary. And in the doctored footage, they say that they basically took slow-mo and they label these shots. This is Linda. She labels the shots for all 15 bullet holes that show up outside that window footage when the agents are crawling in. And she claims that there's at least 6 different weapons that are being fired, but all the sound effects are identical. That every single gunshot for these 15 shots, it's the same like sound clip that someone just like hit the buttons, every single
Oh,
time.
interesting. Yeah.
And again, the footage is this is 1993 that she's putting this together through whatever she assembled from VHS cassettes and stuff. So it's a little bit hard to make it out, but I mean they sound identical, and she claims that like using analysis they were all identical. The end point being that the footage released by the ATF on that particular window issue had been doctored by them to make it sound and look like it was gunfire coming from inside the building rather than off. And then they
Interesting.
also have a report that says the exact opposite, where they show these 3 different agents, the Clinton detail guys, going into the window on the second story, and the report actually mentions the opposite of that, so that they didn't go in. So there's this premise of like, don't believe your eyes, like don't worry about what the original
Mm-hmm.
footage showed. Here's the report, and the report is more important than what. So in the autopsy photos of all 3 of those Clinton private detail guys, they all died with multiple wounds, and they all had a shot to the left temple that exited through the rear of the head in what was quoted as professional execution style. And here's a direct quote from the autopsy report. The guy's name was Nazim Pirwani, and he said, recovery of 1 bullet consisting of a lead-lined copper jacket and a separated steel core consistent with an AK from the left neck. They found that exact same bullet in the machine gun helicopter. So there's another version that the ATF agents that died might have been taken out by the helicopter that was floating around ahead. So I don't know if this is
Ooh.
another like bumbling Keystone Cop thing or if this is a Clinton body count thing.
Man, there's so much to this. That's what I'm saying. It's like people just know the name. They know Waco. They know maybe David Koresh's name. But yeah, dude, it's like there's so many lies. There's so many cover-ups. And again, it doesn't mean that him or the other people or good people or not. It's just a matter of who gets to tell the story. The survivors. So of course they're gonna make it as best as possible for their case and their narrative.
And then one of the eyewitnesses that was used in the legal proceedings that followed all this was a guy named Mark Brillo. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but Mark, as the state's main eyewitness, was legally blind, which is like
That's
crazy,
just
right?
on
It's
the
just
nose. The
crazy that
eyewitness is blind.
the lead eyewitness for Waco was literally was legally blind. And then also there was this group called the Cult Awareness Network that was fairly big at this time. Also a weird link to the whole satanic panic aspect, man.
Of
But the
course.
Cult Awareness Network, they made a lot of these exact same claims about the cult leaders were abusing kids, the cult leaders were abusing women, that they were dealing in illegal firearms, that they're cooking meth. All of these things would be leveraged against numerous quote unquote cults by this cult awareness network. And the cult awareness network was just a branch of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League.
Of
So you start
course. Yeah.
and again, not to skip forward to Oklahoma City, but there's a very similar instance where if you look at Elohim City at the Oklahoma City issue, that they
Mhm.
also had these like ADL operatives that just like, why is the ADL in this compound, like at this location? So the last thing that I want to say about Waco that opens up a whole other can of worms is all the psyop devices. They were using frequency weapons. They were using audible sounds. They were doing weird psychological tests where they would play the sounds of rabbits being slaughtered on
Mhm.
these loudspeakers. And all this, again, in my mind, it comes from like the authoritarian that pushed it too far and doesn't know how to reel it back because then you look like a beta. You're like, oh, I can't have anyone question my authority. So they started out playing loud rock music at Mount Carmel with the logic being like, oh, these are a bunch of Bible freaks. I bet you that they probably don't like rock and roll. So let's blast some like hard metal and some like offensive rock and roll at them, not realizing that Dave Koresh is like, hell yeah, man. Like he
They,
starts jamming out, he hooks up his guitar and he's playing back at him. And when they realize, like, oh, this didn't go the way that we wanted, that's when all of a sudden they're like, bring out the weird tapes, right? And
mhm,
and part of that wasn't just regular psychological warfare, but it was also a sleep deprivation tactic. It was like, let's make sure that they can't get any sleep. Let's shine bright lights at them at all hours of the night. Just make sure that we can disorient them because the agents are able to like go back home for a day and come back the next day and like refresh. And obviously, if
mhm,
you're inside Mount Carmel, you don't get any relief from all this going on. Plus, there's essentially an embargo, right? So you're not getting any new fresh water or food or resources
mhm.
during this entire standoff. So that part is one of the most fascinating to me, but it gets dwarfed in comparison to like, oh, by the way, the government like burnt, almost 100 people alive, most of them children and women and old people. So then it's like the playing the rabbit slaughter sounds doesn't get as top billing just because of how serious everything else came off.
Well, and I mean, back to like Ruby Ridge as well. I mean, they kind of did very similar tactics there as well. Like you were talking about after they shot Vicky Weaver holding their baby, in her arms, shot her in the head while holding a newborn baby or however old the baby was. And then yeah, the psychological tactics of going over the loudspeaker and asking, "Oh, hey, did Vicky make you guys breakfast this morning? What did you guys eat for breakfast this morning?" Like that kind of shit. And then you see the same thing happen all over again. And then you see similar players in here as well. And how do you say his name? Lon Harashi or Haruchi or whatever. He's the one that fired the shot that killed Vicky Weaver, and he just happens to be at Waco as well, of course. Well, I mean, maybe there's possibility just because it's not too far apart, but it's just irony that like, hey, if a cop has a big situation, we take him off the force for 6 weeks or however long, and until we figure out an investigation. But it's like
Not
it
him,
was
bro. They're like, put him back in, coach.
that kid.
Like,
He was effective last time, and then now I don't know, man. People have tried to find that guy. Apparently, he's still alive, but like he's just gone. Like nobody can fucking find him. He's
there's
off.
what would your incentive be to want to be found by anyone
Well,
for any
true,
reason at this point?
but just one of those another used up government pawns, and then you get to just disappear into the sunset, and nobody can find you ever again. And you're like, dude, people got questions.
Let's see. I got a couple other quick notes from another documentary. This is 1997. There was a doc that came out called Waco Rules of Engagement. And this one is the one that had that really creepy initial quote from the kid going like, "Are you gonna kill me?" And it's a little
Mm.
girl talking to Jim Kavanaugh, and Jim Kavanaugh is the main the hostage negotiator, essentially, the guy that's supposed to be de-escalating
Is
this.
he
And
related to Brett Kavanaugh?
no,
Oh, I
no,
was gonna say, whoa. But
but
go ahead.
here's what's interesting too about Waco. Like one of the more interesting aspects is that this wasn't necessarily the ATF and the FBI working in unison. This was the ATF came in, fucked up, had to call the FBI in, and the FBI are ready to like use even more force. But also what happens is as the negotiator is trying to like work things out with Koresh, these snipers, these ex Delta Force agent snipers, they're kind of a different mindset. They're like, screw this Jim Kavanaugh desk jockey that's like sitting in a nice safe office surrounded by personnel and he's like talking on the phone. Screw that, man. Like we're gonna move in and we're gonna take these guys out. We're gonna take Koresh out. So
They're like Robert
even
Davi and Die Hard. That when the FBI guys show up and they're like, "Get in the helicopter, get the sniper rifle," like we're
yeah,
moving
like
in.
all of the deals that Kavanaugh was making and all this of the inroads that he thought he was building, the snipers were like, we don't care about any of that. Yeah, whatever. Tell them whatever you got to tell them. You're just buying us time to move in and make this into a bigger thing. So that was the Rules of Engagement movie, and then they go a little bit more into the detail of the origins. They were talking about the Seventh Day Adventists. It was like a 1935, and even dating back into the 1930s, they were literally were writing these prophecies about the government and the authorities coming and burning them down. And so they were stockpiling weapons all the way back into the 1930s. And then when it didn't happen after a few decades, a lot of people were like, all right, I'm going to go and join some other group now since the whole end of the world thing didn't happen here. And that's when they end up moving to Waco. And another another weird part of this is that David Koresh ends up marrying the woman, or like basically becoming a partner of the wife of the guy that originally moved it in the 1930s into Waco. And she's like an old lady at this point, and he ends up like knocking boots with her for a minute, and she ends up giving control over the Branch Davidians to David Koresh instead
Hmm.
of her own son, I guess. And this turns into a whole, like, he gets into a shootout with David Koresh, him and the son, and this is what leads to, I think, them being put onto the like some sort of a red flag list, like like this whole entire sequence of events. So it's wild, the number of weird little anomalies and like little in stories, and the fact that David Koresh has been known as like, oh, he was abusing kids in there, and then he's the reason that everyone burnt alive. That's usually where the story ends, right? That'll be like the summary you get. You don't get all these other crazy parts. You definitely don't get the Clinton body count. You don't get the different operation with the firebombing and the three policemen that were supposed to be independent investigators. Like there are so many weird anomalies that you add up into this one event that it has to be at least like 10 different psyops baked into one.
That one's crazy. I didn't even know about that, about the firebomb thing you were talking about. Like that's I'm gonna have to look into that,
It,
outside of this, because that's just another piece of the damn thread you're pulling on, and then you see like back to like what I said a little bit ago about how the '90s, everybody looks back with rose-colored lenses or whatever, hindsight 2020 shit. Well, I guess rose-colored lenses, but they look back and they're like, oh, the '90s were so much better than now. And maybe yes, the world's chaos right now too. But you go back and you're like, dude, there was these crazy events that just one after another. You had basically in a 5 year span, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 year span. You had everything from Rodney King, you had Ruby Ridge, you had Waco, you had OKC, you had Columbine, and that's just a few things. There's more stuff in between there too. And it's like, dude, like there was just so much chaos going on, and half of it was orchestrated by our own government. So it's interesting to see people surprised that the government is doing shocking things now, and you're like, brother, they've been doing it forever,
and the weird after, like the campaign that happened after all this, like there were congressional hearings of like what happened, why do these kids die? If you go back and watch some of those original congressional hearings, also, this will blow your mind that the leading bulldog that was on behalf of the state, like, carrying water for the state, was Chuck Schumer, a famous relative of Amy
Ooh.
Schumer. But that Chuck Schumer is on, you can find video clip of him saying that that he gets into an argument with an ATF agent, and they're talking about flashbangs, and Chuck Schumer's like, you can't get hurt by a flashbang. And then like the actual agents there, they're like, sir, with all due respect, it's like, I've actually used a flashbang. Like, yeah, you can lose like a hand over a flashbang. You can get
Yeah, it's the other half of
hurt
the
over
name.
a
Bang.
flashbang.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but the what he's trying to argue against is that it couldn't have been the ATF or the FBI that caused Mount Carmel to burn down, and that flashbangs are just they're just like a bright light, just a bright LED
Sparklers.
flash. Yeah,
Yeah.
just sparkler. Um, and then also, if you look at the court case, the ATF was citing wrong statutes. Like the ATF was in such a hurry to make this huge splash that they didn't even fill out their own paperwork correctly. And they even misrepresented the original raid on Mount Carmel. The ATF misrepresented that to the military as a drug raid. And again, harkening back to like the fact that they were able to get the tank in was based on them getting that Bradley in, was because they said there was a meth lab, because that was what gave them the justification. If they hadn't said that it was based on a drug raid, then they wouldn't have actually gotten, maybe, right? Theoretically, they
Hmm.
might not have gotten the backing of Fort Bragg to begin with. So everything that happened leading up to the standoff to begin with was all based on like lie after lie after lie, on top of the bumbling Keystone Cops that say that they had an element of surprise. They got ruined by the USPS delivery stepbrother. But what they don't also mention is that the news was there 30 minutes before the raid. So obviously, the ATF had tipped the news off, and they thought they were going to go in there, do a quick show of force, the thing was going to be over within like an hour or two. They'd have all this great footage to be like, hey, look, here's the ATF, your tax dollars at work. We're super efficient. And they just vastly underestimated that these dudes were for real. This was not just a little club meeting that went out of hand. Like they were down to stick it out.
Dude, it's just a wild story. At the end of the day, our government's going to do what our government's going to do. And then there's a few people that stand up for themselves when shit happens. And then, not to sound black pilled, but most of the time it doesn't turn out very well. I mean, whether it's a Ruby Ridge, whether it's a Waco, whether it's any other situation, it's just an interesting time to look back and go like, dude, there's a lot of weird shit that our government's doing now that, like I said, it's nothing new under the sun. They've been doing this forever. It's just becoming more obvious at this point, and it's becoming more everybody at this point. It's not so much that, oh, this religious sect or this blah 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 or these people. I'm just kind of saying in closing that, like, it's good to look back on these events and these situations. If you're just now getting into questioning the government, if you're just now getting into conspiracies, like, man, you got a whole lot of catching up to do, everybody. But man, Thomas, tell everybody where they can find you, Paranoid American, and what you got going on, brother. I love this. This was a really good one.
Yeah, I got all sorts of projects at paranoidamerican.com. My big thing is that I make comic books. I worked at Disney for 10 years, and while I was there, I started a comic company. And my whole goal was I want to do what I'm being paid to do for Disney, but I want to talk about MK Ultra and Waco, and
Mm-hmm.
alchemy and like all sorts of weird topics. So I've been doing that since 2012, and you can go and find all kinds of comics on all sorts of topics. The ones that I think you would like if you like this episode, I've got an anthology called Paranoid American History 101. You can get on my website, you can find it on Amazon, and it's got 8 different stories that span from JFK assassination to the Skull and Bones digging up Geronimo's grave, to the Iran-Contra scandal and DARE program, even to Charles Lindbergh maybe killing his own kid because he was like had a handicap. So a whole bunch of different, like all based on American true history that are all backed up. I've got like sources and citations, and then fun stuff too. Like for example, I got a comic with Sam Tripoli coming out later this year, Chaos Twins 2, which maybe not the easiest segue here, but like a family friendly, all ages comic book about fun cryptids, and it's sort of a cool X-Files conspiracy theory series with no politics and no gore and no sort of like crude humor, which if you know me or Sam is kind of a rarity that we would even collaborate on something like that.
Right.
But I love it, man. It's great, and it's a great way to get people that are conspiracy minded to like kind of get your kids into it too, without going right for the black pill, without going for like, did you know that the government murdered babies and they burnt
Full
children
Alex
alive?
Jones. Yeah.
Like you can ease them into it, like, hey, have you ever heard of Bigfoot? Well, maybe the government's hiding Bigfoot. Who knows why? But it's a
Right.
fun story to talk about.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, it's like teaching your kids of like, hey, you don't listen to me half the time, and I'm the authority figure. Why don't you not listen to the bigger authority
Bro,
figures too?
what a great pitch, man. I love that. I'm gonna take that.
Hell yeah. Dude, man, Paranoid American, ladies and gentlemen, you're always a blast to have a conversation with. And this was a good one. This was a really good one.
This is one of the most important thing, and it happened like in our lifetimes. So I guess I feel a little bit extra connected to it.
Hmm. Dude, let's do an OKC bombing next one. I'm in Oklahoma, man. My mom, weirdly enough, she worked for Social Security Administration for decades. She's retired now, but here in, well, I don't live in Tulsa, but I used to. In Tulsa, she worked there. And then she was supposed to, like, for some trip, not trip, but like some work day, Lucky Larry Silverstein style, I guess. But they rescheduled some day that she was supposed to go
Yeah,
to
you
the
can say
Oklahoma
she got
City
a call
building.
from Israel. It's cool, bro. We're not gonna
Yeah,
judge.
dude, for real. She got that $7,000 tweet. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, dude, she was supposed to be there that day. And like, I don't know, a week before that, they were like, oh, we're going to reschedule it for like a month or something like that. And then, holy shit, weird coincidence. But dude, let's do an OKC one next time.
I'm in, man. I've got way more notes on OKC, and in fact, I think that I've got interview scheduled with Tanya Yiki, which is um
Oh,
Terrence Yeeky's wife at the time when OKC actually all went down. So this is a topic that I am well beyond fascinated. In fact, I've been working on a 6-issue comic book about OKC called Patriot Day, which is all based
Damn.
around Patriot Day, which was Timothy McVeigh's, like his, according to, depending on your angle on this, but that this was a direct reaction to Ruby Ridge and Waco, that those two events
Hmm.
built up to Oklahoma City.
Well, hey, dude, maybe we can call in Timothy McVeigh himself. I mean, the fittest flat earther, and see if he can weigh in on it. I kid. Fuck that guy though. But anyways, dude, Thomas, you're awesome. I'm gonna have all your links in the show notes as usual. And Stitt-Heads, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you assholes next time. Peace out, dude. This was fun. Oops.
I had